Sup guys, I will be sharing my findings on GVB after having maxed her out and testing her in some meta fights. Expectations going into this were that she would output more damage than pretty much every other ship, but doesn't provide as much as a boost to your other ships or play well into 20-second time debuffs, due to her half cooldown mechanic compared to a lot of other battleships. First, for light armor, I tested her against Regensburg meta by slotting her into some of the best performing fleet compositions currently to see how much of a difference she makes over existing ships. Regensburg meta is quite nice because she's tanky enough to run a full fleet and not overkill by too much, and also doesn't have any annoying mechanics that make the results inapplicable to other scenarios. I don't have the raw footage of all of these runs because I did them on my phone while I was bored outside, so I'll just discuss the results. The first test I did was replacing line with GVB, using her alongside Yorktown 2 and Lexington 2. There isn't any crazy synergy here, her role is to simply contribute a lot of damage. Kearsarge is also a very good option in this spot for this specific fleet, but her performance is extremely close to Line's anyway, and she's much more limited in use compared to Line and GVB, so I'll leave her out of the comparison. Looking at the result screens of just one of each of the runs, you pretty much see exactly what you would expect. Her personal damage is slightly higher than that of Lion, but since Lion has a more potent debuff, the rest of the fleet deals more damage with her than GVB, except Eldritch, as GVB triggers her laser barrage more often. The difference is extremely subtle though. By the way, don't forget that Lion has a special burn, so her damage is slightly higher than the end screen indicates. The actual differences here are tiny. I cherry-picked two close runs that didn't kill so we can see what the results look like when there's no overkill. In the overall results, the fleet with Lion only narrowly missed out 1 out of 5 one-shots, where 2 were missed with GVB and by a slightly larger margin. The sample size is a bit too small to draw a solid conclusion, but while watching the runs, the fleet with GVB actually seemed to have overkilled by a little bit more. I also recorded the HP remaining as the last round of salvos were starting to fire, but it's kind of meaningless since GVB's damage is more spread out, so the fleets with her are always going to have fewer bars remaining by that point. Since Willie D only buffs GVB for about half her salvos, I tried replacing her with Plymouth, who buffs GVB for every salvo, but the results turned out to be significantly worse. Willie D is way too important for the damage of the two carriers. So, in this scenario where there is no inherent synergy in any of the ships with GVB, and also strong ships in the fleet that make full use of Lion's better debuff, GVB can still hold her own. One thing to consider though is that the fleet with Lion doesn't necessarily have to rely on Eldritch's slow, since Lion's salvos are synced with Lexington's route, so that fleet can opt for a higher damaging Vanguard tank like Z52, which would increase its performance just slightly. Another fleet composition that I tested was replacing Alsace with GVB, using her alongside Lion and Fritz Rume. This time, I had all Vanguard ships that fully supported the flagship. For both fleets, Eldritch's slow is needed, although it could be better to run Aurora than Trafalgar. Despite the results looking quite close, the fleet with Alsace narrowly managed to kill the boss each run, while it was pretty comfortably overkilling with GVB. I could definitely feel a bigger difference here than the first test. The two of them can't really be used effectively together, because you would either have to put GVB in the flagship position, in which case Alsace's preload will not activate Trafalgar and Eldritch's debuffs and be pretty much wasted, or you put Alsace in the flagship to buff her preload, but then half of GVB's salvos won't be buffed, which would be even worse. So in the end, Lion ends up being the most unshakable member here. In any case, it feels to me that this fleet with GVB, Lion, and Rume outperforms the USS carriers by a noticeable margin. Bristol meta is coming pretty much tomorrow, and I expect that this will be the best main fleet going into that. For medium armor, there's actually a bit of a problem. All of the permanently available meta bosses are too squishy and get overkilled by the main fleet alone, and on top of that, a lot of them send extra stuff too, like planes, submarines, or summons, so there isn't really a good place to test her out. Looking back at my Yorktown meta tier list and seeing where Lion and Mecklenburg are relative to Soyuz, Nakhimov, and Rume, with Mecklenburg being as high as she is despite needing Bismarck to be activated, I would assume that Lion and GVB will also be the strongest core against medium armor as well. Finally, there is heavy armor, and believe it or not, the addition of GVB actually made the biggest difference in what the best heavy armor fleet appears to be. Going back to my tests from when I completed 3 Mecklenburg guns, battleship fleets and IJN carriers were perfectly balanced despite Bismarck being pretty weak against heavy armor and pretty much only existed to enable Mecklenburg. Being able to now use GVB instead of Bismarck to enable Mecklenburg swings the advantage to the battleships' favor completely. Doing just one run with each main fleet comp and solo Eldritch in the Vanguard against the heavy armor Nagato meta, you can see just how much of a gap there is now between the battleship fleet and the carrier fleet compared to before. For the record, here is what it looks like if I replace Shinano and Eldritch for Nakhimov and Moskva for their route, increasing consistency but decreasing total damage potential. The biggest difference maker here is that the best battleship gun against heavy armor also easily gets out 4 salvos within the time frame, whereas carriers have to sacrifice a lot of raw damage to do the same, and they just cannot match the damage with 3 strikes. Notice how the carriers that can keep up with battleships like Rume, Yorktown 2, and Lexington 2 just happen to be able to go for 4 strikes without sacrificing too much damage. If we're considering a full fleet, then carriers still have a weapon called Kazagumo, who offers a very powerful debuff specifically for carriers, but a carrier fleet is unable to activate Trafalgar's evasion rate debuff, so that pretty much evens things out. You could consider running a battleship fleet with 2 carriers, but the synergy isn't quite there against heavy armor, where battleships easily get 4 salvos while the IJN carriers can't. With the Mecklenburg gun and these new battleships having extra main gun capacity, the intrinsic advantages that carriers had as a whole class have been equalized, and we're now in an age where battleships are pretty much stronger for everything. It's honestly getting kind of silly how strong these battleships are, since they don't even have any kind of super synergy like the IJN carriers. They just kind of buff everyone else no matter what, and they only have to change their main gun to become the strongest at anything, whereas the best carriers specialize into one armor type, whether it be light armor for the USS carriers, medium armor for Nakhimov, and heavy armor for the IJN carriers. We're also getting a Gear Lab update featuring a Rainbow Destroyer gun, of which 2 already exist, while we still don't have a Rainbow-aimed torpedo bomber. I really wish we got an aimed torpedo bomber instead, something like a Rainbow version of a Sayun that keeps the raw damage of a Ryusei, but enables the IJN carriers to get 4 strikes, just like battleships can with the Mecklenburg gun, but it would make too much sense. Also, I'm not salty at all about upgrading 3 twin 100mm to +13 and having them become completely obsolete. Oh yeah, the Alsace rerun is also announced, which means we're getting another Mogador gun. Looks like it's full GG for these plates. Back onto topic, I'm going to be updating my battleship tier list when the dev adds the new ships to the site, probably this weekend. GVB will land in first place, I think, essentially matching Lion's output in a fleet with pretty much no synergy, and also enabling Mecklenburg to take anti-heavy armor battleship fleets to another level. I'll also move Mecklenburg 1 spot up over Alsace, since GVB is going to be used in places where Alsace was used before, and obviously Mecklenburg has a much easier time finding spots in fleets alongside GVB now. Alright, that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.